Hello there, it is a Tuesday, which means it's time for another In Real Life video. This week, we're taking a question submitted by a gentle viewer like you. Feel free to submit any that you may want to submit. Feel free to do that. As always, if it's a little too personal, breaks terms of service on YouTube or anything similar to that, it'll have to be ignored. But otherwise, it'll get added to our ever-growing, super-duper long list of ones that I have going. And like I said, today, we're pulling from that list. The person who submitted this week's little question, their username should be somewhere in the lower third right about now. Regardless, they write in asking. Actually, 3 questions they wrote in. But this one I thought was so poignant that we didn't need to do a big grouping of them, right? Anyway, they ask, does Lyle have a favorite non-story focused NPC of all time? Just thought I'd put all my questions into one. I don't know that I do have one favorite one, but I kind of wrote down on the little document there a bit of a list. Right? I don't know. I always feel like I have difficulty picking like one favorite of something. Generally, whenever I'm like super duper into something, or conversely, not terribly into something, right? Like any field or hobby or whatever, it's difficult to pick favorites. If you're somewhere in the middle, right, as far as enthusiasm goes, I feel like it's easier to pick a favorite. But you know, if you're not super duper into it, right, like, it can be easy to be like, oh yeah, sure, my favorite, I don't know, my favorite song is whatever, right? Whereas if you're really into it, you're like, well, it really depends, right? It really depends on my mood. I like this one for this reason. Same goes for I think all walks of life, all hobbies, all things to be enthusiastic about, all things in which you could pick a favorite of it, right? But in this case, we'll do our best, right? So here, of course, the main important part of this question is that it has to be non-story focused, right? So I would say, I would even up the ante a little bit and say like, has very little, if anything, to do with the story, right? Let alone focus, let alone like a primary character, let alone being like not story critical. But I would say it'd be even more fun to try someone who's like, you could completely miss this NPC if you wanted to, right? Most people would encounter them, you know, but you could remove this character from the storyline and it wouldn't really impact the main storyline, right? It definitely sort of would show more information or like highlight other parts of other themes or sort of like build upon the themes that exist, you know, stuff like that. But otherwise it's not critical. So I got a few on this list. There's a few that are like, you know, goofy fun characters and stuff like that. You know, the sort of NPCs that really only exist in our memories because they did something funny or like behave in a funny way or have a funny line. Stuff like the I just won the lottery guy from New Vegas who shows up in Nipton. And then as he leaves, he says, later, right? I don't know. I love that guy. I don't even remember his name. I know he's voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, amazingly enough, the same person who voices Peter Parker in the new Spider-Man games and stuff from Insomniac. Big fan of that guy. They showed off a little recreation of it, including a new voice actor, because of course you're mandated to do it in the sort of full conversion mod that's working to put New Vegas in Fallout 4. But yeah, big fan of that guy. There's no shortage of characters like this in like Bethesda games, right? They're kind of ripe for this type of NPC, this type of like iconic but ultimately unimportant character. You know, you've got your adoring fan, Bayazora, the guy singing the Cliff Razor song, fly and fly and fly so high, talking mud crab, Tarhiel, the wizard who crashes from the sky. You get the Scroll of Icaranian Flight. Creeper, I'm creeping. Uncle Crassus Curio being a complete pervert in probably a horrible way, honestly. You get the kids, the McCready in Fallout 3 who swears so much, right? There's no shortage of characters like this, right? All of them really good, right? Really, really iconic, but also outside a lot of these sorts of more games that sort of lean into this sort of sandbox feel a little bit more, but aren't even necessarily, like, I would say Dragon's Dogma 1 is definitely more of a like action role-playing game, but it's got some like sandboxy role-playing game stuff going on the periphery. And of course, who could forget, there's so many lines in that game that people love, like they're ill like fire, but of course delivered by an NPC, their masterworks all, you can't go wrong. Who doesn't love that guy? What even is his name? We just played through Dragon's Dogma 1 like within the last year, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it's the blacksmith in Grand Soren. But nonetheless, what an amazing non-critical NPC. There's others, of course, that sort of tie into side stories or small like side arcs and stuff that are sort of, once again, like non-mission critical. Two of which spring to mind. Let me double check here. Yeah, two of which spring to mind immediately, and there's definitely some recency bias here. Make no mistake. I'm sure, like, if I really sat down and thought about this for like a whole week, we could come up with like quite the comprehensive list. But characters with interesting little arcs or little tidbits to contribute. I would say one that really surprised me from last year, or was it the year before? In Elden Ring, slight spoilers for a side quest in Elden Ring here, but the lady who eats eyeballs, right? The eyeball eating lady, and you can hear her eating the eyeballs. That was absolutely wild, right? In that game, there is a guy who is a pot. There is a guy who is a jar, and he was very nice and very kind and had a very like kindly voice to him, but that's nothing for how horrifying that, like, there's even a guy who eats poop. There is a guy in Elden Ring that eats poop, but that's got nothing on the lady who eats eyeballs, right? Imagine that. But yeah, she's out there, she's eating eyeballs, you can hear her munching and crunching. It's wild. I'm pretty sure she eats her own, right? I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, she eats her own dang eyeballs. It was wild. I loved it. I love that eyeball eating woman. I don't even remember her name, but she was the one who did that. On a completely different note, I mean, granted, that was meant to be, right? Obviously, within the text, within the game itself, eyeball eating lady was meant to be disturbing. It was meant to be like, oh, this is so sad. This is messed up. But I couldn't help but be grossed out and amazed and sort of enthused by the spectacle of it, right? I was completely astonished and taken in by the sheer, I don't know, gall to have this person eating eyeballs. And you feed it to her. You feed her the eyeballs. You bring her eyeballs to eat and stuff, right? She thinks they're grapes for a while, and then she just kind of goes with it. But sort of leaving spoilers for Elden Ring and moving into side quest spoilers for Disco Elysium, there is a side character. Well, there's quite a few side characters, but some of them are a lot more quote-unquote mission critical than others. But one that really sort of affected me, especially during our playthrough, was the working class woman. I forgot her name, but when you meet her, it's always her like title in dialogue and everything is always listed as working class woman. You can totally find her name and learn her name, but her little story with her family is kind of incredible. During the playthrough of that game, it brought me to tears twice. And during her little story unfolding with her family, that was one of them. That was one of the first times, I think, ever on the channel that I was playing a game and I got brought to tears. It was amazing, right? And it was completely optional. It was a completely a side quest. You could very easily go through the entire game and take a lot away from that game without ever doing any of that, which is kind of incredible. But of course, she's placed so that I think almost everyone will encounter her, whether or not you decide to go down that route and sort of engage with her and her family. That's up to you, right? But I don't know. I guess if I had to get as close as possible to picking just like one favorite, like I said, it's kind of impossible, and I wouldn't even, outside of being asked, like, we're shooting the shit or whatever, what's your favorite non-story critical NPC? Outside of that, I wouldn't ever like immediately say this. But true enough, and I've remarked on this a little bit before, but I don't think I ever said they were my favorite. But I think it's got to be Lydia from Skyrim. I didn't even really mess around with her hardly at all in any of our 502 videos of the Skyrim playthrough, right? But for me, and like I said, I've talked about this before a bit, so if you're like a longtime viewer or listener or whatever, you'll be familiar with what I'm about to say. But Lydia kind of perfectly encapsulates what's fantastic about Elder Scrolls games, right? About Skyrim specifically, but on a broader scope, Lydia perfectly encapsulates like the ideal Elder Scrolls experience in a way. Wherein she is basically not perfect, not exactly, but really close to being just a complete blank slate. She has basically very little in the way of defining characteristics. Her most memorable line is her complaining a little bit that she's sworn to carry your burdens, which I can't remember. Do other NPCs in the game say that at all? I don't think so. No, I think they do. I think other housecarls, because she's one of several, I think other housecarls will say that exact same line to you. But sort of what makes Lydia magical is the way in which the player going through this sort of sandbox role-playing game, Skyrim, you meet her and you begin to attribute a lot of things to her. You build out her character where there really isn't much, right? So many people have like fond ideas and fond thoughts of like adventuring around with Lydia, especially on your first playthrough where, you're pretty much guaranteed to encounter her. People get married to her and stuff in the game, which you can totally do. But like I said, she's not terribly unique. It's what's amazing is how it encapsulates sort of the degree to which players playing the game sort of like make believe, right? Sort of tell their own stories within this sandbox, within this world, right? Like I said, it perfectly encapsulates sort of this sandbox role-playing experience. You're afforded like various toys and stuff to play with in the sandbox, and you can shape your own stories, make your own fun, right? And Lydia is the perfect example of that, I think. People have so many different stories of adventuring around with Lydia. So many people, even people who don't really like Skyrim, will know of Lydia, right? Lydia of Skyrim. She's incredibly important to like the mythos of Skyrim, right? And they even fully acknowledge it, right? Like there's been plenty of things, I can't even remember off the top of my head, but they've definitely like acknowledged like, yeah, I'm sworn to carry your burdens. That's sort of Lydia's iconic line, which she shares with other characters, I believe. They've definitely lampshaded that before many a time, and many a people have made like fan songs and little machinimas back in the day. Just all sorts of stuff about Lydia, this character who is kind of a non-character, right? But like I said, that's kind of the beauty of it, is that almost everyone kind of collectively met Lydia and started ascribing personality traits to her, right? There's situations where like you can meet someone else who enjoyed and had Lydia with them, but they thought of her completely differently than you, right? And it's entirely valid, right? The way in which they sort of ascribe different traits and personality to Lydia, right? And in this way, I think it's kind of beautiful, just on a creativity sense, just like sort of being able to witness like how so many different people interacted with this sandbox and sort of decide like, oh, my Lydia will be like this. Maybe I think my Lydia is kind of like an a-hole or whatever. Mine, I think she complains a lot about being sworn to carry my burdens. But you know, she's just a big softie or whatever, right? And I got married to her or whatever, stuff like that. I very much enjoy that. I think it's kind of beautiful. I think it's kind of magical. Yeah, it's probably got to be Lydia. If I have to pick for fun a favorite non-story critical NPC, it's probably Lydia from Skyrim, because she's so much and so many different things to so many people, right? I think there's charm and beauty and something, I don't know, deeply human and soulful about it. Not to get all like kind of corny here, but yeah, there's something kind of soulful about the idea that so many people encountered this character and have made memories with her when she's barely a character, right? You made her into a character. It was you, right? You were the storyteller all along. You were making your own stories. I think there's something very endearing about that. Man, this has gotten very sentimental. All right. Well, I guess that ought to do it for this week. Before I start crying, that ought to do it for this week. Big fan of Lydia, big fan of all of them. You know, these non-critical NPCs that sort of get attached to our minds in this way. They're sort of the spice of life, aren't they, in these sorts of games, right? All right. That ought to do it. Yeah. Until next time, please take care of each other.